Now, when we talk about why did the colonists come to America, we've got four main reasons. The first really large reason is that they wanted religious freedom. So when we're looking at the Puritans were a group of people who really wanted to come here because they wanted to fix the Church of England. They wanted to purify, if that helps you remember it. They wanted to purify the Church of England. They said the Church of England was just a little dirty and they just wanted to straighten it up just a little bit. They thought it was still fixable. The Pilgrims, though, the Pilgrims were they were like Puritans, but they separated away from the Puritans. And they also wanted to separate entirely from the church. They said the church was too corrupt. An example of how the church was corrupt was because the church would do things like say, like if you wanted all your sins, you would go to the church and you would say, I have sinned, and the priest would say, pretty much, if you pay me, I will speak with God, and God will wipe away all your sins. Which, who can afford to pay the church? Well, your wealthy people can afford to do that, to get their sins wiped away. And your poor people ended up being your people who were sinners and wouldn't go to heaven. And so that was very upsetting for people because it made the church look like they were very corrupt. But that's just one example. Another reason why people came here is that they wanted to make money. Now, what kind of things were they thinking they would do? Well, first they thought the streets were going to be paved with gold, and that's not quite true, being as we didn't have streets or gold laying around. They also, once they got here, they found this amazing thing called maize, or we call it today corn. And that is one of those things that when we look at what corn is in today, it is in a lot of stuff. And they also used it for a lot of stuff back then. They also would grow these wonderful things right here. That is, just in case you don't know, tobacco. And they called this brown gold because once they realized how amazing this was to smoke, they were over the moon about it, and they wanted more. England, the British people, wanted more and more and more of it. So they couldn't make it fast enough. And so if you grew this, you were going to have lots and lots of money. Now, these charter companies, now we have to look at the word charter. Charter means permission from the government. And so once the monarchy or parliament said, yes, you can come and make a company here, a bunch of ships would come here. And like Jamestown, for example, Jamestown, Virginia was sent and started by a charter company. You would also had people that came through indentured servitude. Indentured servitude is a person who is going to come here for a fixed amount of time. Usually, they couldn't afford the ticket to ride on the boat to get here. So what they would do is they would approach a very wealthy person, and the wealthy person would agree that I will pay for your passage on the ship if you work for me for a certain number of years. And so let's just say like 7 years. Now, during that 7 years, the servant would not get paid. However, at the end of 7 years, the person would be able to go free. However, if we think about this, you've been working a job for 7 years and you never received any pay whatsoever. Are you going to be able to leave? Now, typically, students will ask me, are these white people? Are they black people? Are they Native Americans? Indentured servants were everybody, but you had a lot of poor white people that made their way here. Now, once people got here, and then they would buy and they would sell Native Americans in the same way. But mostly we're talking about white people that would be indentured servants. Well, then we've got to talk about another group of people too. That slaves would come from Africa, and they would be in these terrible, terrible ships. And they would be packed in to these terrible ships in these tiny quarters, and they'd have to sit there together. And when they first came across the Atlantic Ocean from Africa over to North and South America, it would take about 6 months. And they got this trip eventually, like once they realized where they were going, it would take them about 3 months. However, if you can imagine this terrible journey that would take for 6 months, and you're sitting down there with crowded around people, and a lot of people would get sick and they would die, and you weren't fed very well. It was a terrible, terrible journey, and they end up calling this the Middle Passage. and it continued for quite a long time. You also had another group of people. Now, this is not quite as large as these other four groups, but these are people who the king was in Parliament. They were locking up people for not paying their bills in England, and they ran out of space in prison. Well, where am I going to send them? So the king decided, in Parliament, decided to send them in two spots. So you had Australia, which started as a prison colony, but then they also created a new one in Georgia. Now this guy named James Oglethorpe, he was sent to Georgia, which was named for King George, to start this prison colony. If you've ever seen the movie Forrest Gump, the park that he's sitting in is actually named after James Oglethorpe. So now, what ideas did the colonists bring when they came? Mercantilism. Now, mercantilism is a big, big thing. You definitely need to make sure you're taking good notes on this. They brought religious freedom, common law, and then self-government. So first, let's talk about mercantilism. There are three main components to mercantilism. First and foremost, you must sell more than you buy. You have to send more brown gold or tobacco out than you are bringing, say, seeds in. You have to sell more. You have to be able to make more money. Now, the second point would be that raw materials are produced for the mother country. So the Americans, the colonists, needed to make products or needed to chop down trees and send lumber to Great Britain. And then Great Britain would then take that lumber, a whole tree, if you will, and they would send it, they would refine it and make like a chair or tables out of it, and they would send those back to the colonies. And in that capacity, England, say I sold a whole tree for $10 to England, England could then sell me a table and chairs for $100. So England is clearly going to be making more money about this. And the third principle is that wealth is going to be measured in gold. Now, whenever we talk about the triangle of trade, it's important for us to kind of draw this off to the corner of our paper. So we have our colonies over here in America. We have Europe, which you have a lot of factories and places to be able to make refined materials. And then you also have Africa. So we would take that lumber or the tobacco or corn or chickens or hogs, and we would send those to Europe. Now Europe would take those things and they would refine those materials. And so if you took sugarcane from America, they would send the sugarcane to Europe, and Europe would then make sugar out of it. And with sugar, they would make rum, and they would send that to Africa. They would do the same thing with cotton, and then they would make cloth out of it. The same thing. And then they would take these refined goods, and they would sell them to Africa, to Africans, and then in exchange for those goods, they would sell them slaves. And so on that journey would be called the Middle Passage. People also came for religious freedom, kind of, sort of. We're going to talk about this a little bit more because it really wasn't all that religious freedom-ish. That they came to get away from someone telling them what to do, but when they got here, they still told people what kind of religion that they were supposed to have. Common law is the idea that laws are based on precedents, that we know without ever writing the law down what the decision is going to be. Now, in America, we do not have common law. All our laws are going to be written down. However, we can almost, with surety, say that like in your house, just like in my house, there's certain things, like we don't have the rules written down in my house. However, my children know that we are not supposed to jump on the couch. Now, that's not written anywhere. However, how did my children learn that that was a law in my home? Is because somebody jumped on the couch and then they got in trouble for jumping on it. So now they know what the law is when it comes to jumping on the couch in my house. And then the third or fourth reason why people would come here is that they wanted to be able to govern themselves, or why they came here. They wanted to be able to govern themselves. And there's two clear examples in the colonies. The first one would be the Mayflower Compact. Now, the Mayflower Compact was written on the Mayflower by the Pilgrims, and this is their plan of direct democracy. Now, just to review, Direct democracy is when everybody agrees how we're going to run and the government, and everybody is going to have a vote. The second type of self-government we're going to see in the colonies is going to be in Virginia. So this one is in Massachusetts, and this one is in Virginia. And this ends up being our very first elected representative democracy, in which they selected people to go and meet and make laws. So those are two clear examples of government in America. And that brings us to the end of today's lesson.